My name's Myron Orfield. I'm one of Prentice's colleagues, and I'm going to be moderating the last panel. We've got a few additional panelists that'll be joining us for the Q&A, and I'm going to introduce them. You've already been introduced to the panelists that are here today. Laura Cusisto will join us online. She is the National Legal Affairs reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Laura led a team of reporters who received an award in 2022 for reporting on the fall of Roe v. Wade, and in 2020 she was co-recipient of an award for reporting on fatal errors in New York City's response to the coronavirus. She previously covered the U.S. housing market. Laura has been reporting on the Morrill and Sitzer-Burnett class action lawsuits since early in the litigation and in the recent turmoil at NAR and in the real estate brokerage business. Will Freed is here in the room with us. He is a senior data analyst at True Footage, an appraisal technology startup. Before that, he was a data scientist at Rex Real Estate, where he was heavily involved in Rex's legal efforts. Will led the data analysis for Rex's antitrust lawsuit against Zillow and NAR, provided testimony in both in the Morrill and Sitzer-Burnett class action lawsuits, and presented evidence of anti-competitive conduct to the federal and state antitrust agencies. Will holds a master's degree in data science from Harvard University and a BS in mechanical engineering from Harvard College. John Hatfield also joins us online. He studied market design, an engineering-oriented field of economic theory that considers how the design of the rules and regulations of a market affect the functioning and outcomes of that market. He specializes in matching theory, a field of economics that studies markets in which agents have explicit preferences over whom they buy from and sell to, not just over the underlying goods bought and sold. Will and John are co-authors, along with Jordan Berry of A2 Agent, about commission-based steering in residential real estate. So with that, I'm going to go to the questions. Anna will be in the corner. Sally, I'm sorry. She'll be, if people want to ask questions, they can come over to that corner where Sally's going to be. And then there's also, I'm going to be getting online questions here on my phone. So we're going to go back and forth. But first, I've got three questions. First, to Laura Cusisto. You ready to roll?
These are from the registration, pre-registration.
These are from the pre-registration, yes. Why now? Price fixing in this industry has been an obvious fact of life for well over 50 years. What has changed to make these lawsuits viable?
I know you was another one you had about the rule, and I think that the answer to that question is in part exactly what you just said. The rule was out there in plain sight. Anybody could see it in any NAR's handbook. It's sort of a fact of life for home buyers and home sellers. And so I think that it was hard for someone to kind of figure out the theory to challenge the rule, to kind of even just see the rule. It was sort of just something that I think had become invisible. And I think a few different things happened about 5 years ago. One was that you had a lot of VC money pouring into the industry. You had companies like Rex, like Laura, that put enough money, smart leadership, and had smart business plans, and were going under. And I think that sort of highlighted the barriers to competition in the industry. And then I think you kind of had Doug Miller, who I think is here, Prentice, you and I have spoken about this. You had people who just have been kind of chipping away at this and trying to figure out the theory, and I think just kind of finally landed on that theory. And then I think finally you had DOJ, which had been kind of precluded by a consent decree from investigating in the industry, kind of that going away, and them kind of getting interested in this again. Folks like Rex sending them these recorded calls that I think were very we're just kind of really kind of brought home what was going on to the public. And so I think of it as a sort of a perfect storm.
Thank you very much. John Hatfield, how do you respond to realtors who say this has no impact on what is presently occurring? And attorneys, they have a typical fee for contingent litigation that hasn't been changed much over 35 plus years that we've seen. Real estate commissions have always been negotiable. How is the market price for real estate commissions a cartel or a conspiracy, as referred to in some of the press, but the legal world is not?
So I guess those are two different questions. The first one I think we've spent a lot of time today answering, which is whether or not we think this particular settlement will change the way the real estate business is done. And as Jordan and a lot of other people have said, we're maybe not willing to say that we think that this is really going to lead to, commissions getting lower than 6%. I'll come back to that point in a second, but I'll answer the second question now. So I think what's special about the real estate industry is it what Jordan and I have called with some of our other co-authors the collaborative industry. If to work as a real estate agent, unlike most industries, you need to work with your competitor. If I run a barbershop and I lower my price, the barbershop, 3 blocks down the street can't, make my life more difficult because I don't need to work with the barbershop three blocks down the street. But as a real estate agent, I have to work with other real estate agents. If I'm representing Jordan, I may need to work with Laura, who's representing Rob. So that collaborative nature of the industry makes it much easier to maintain these kinds of, social norms or, cartel-like practices, anti-competitive practices, which is what we saw in the Burnett verdict. Actually, a good analogy to this, a good metaphor industry, is NASDAQ market makers back in the 1990s. So there was an antitrust or an antitrust case there as well, because NASDAQ market makers were basically artificially inflating spreads. And again, market makers need to work with each other. It's a collaborative industry. And so we saw that the market makers were able to create social norms, which they enforced, and there's some great audio tapes of the things they would say to each other, which I will not repeat in public. And again, people eventually, economists documented this behavior, and a coalition of the DOJ, just like Laura was talking about, a coalition of the DOJ and private action and academics and activists all came together to say, look, you need to stop ripping off consumers. And I think, taking this farther as an answer to the first question, there's a lot to be positive about if we look at that example, because that example, they eventually did stop ripping off consumers. We saw spreads in the NASDAQ fall precipitously so that when, people were buying stock for their 401k plans, they got a better price. And we're hoping the exact same thing will happen in the real estate industry today. I'm not sure that the agreement we have right now will do it, is for reasons that Jordan and Rob and others laid out. But I think with enough work, we can get to there the same way that we did with the NASDAQ market maker.
Thank you. I have a question for Will Freed. Do you believe that first-time homebuyers and FHA VA loans will be truly disadvantaged? If so, what are the likely outcomes of this scenario coming to life? And what is the impact of commission changes on the price of a home?
Great. So 2 questions there. We'll take them one at a time. In terms of the first question, no, I do not think that FHA and VA homebuyers are going to be disadvantaged. I think it's a red herring that the industry has put out there to try to deflect from the anti-competitive concerns that have been voiced so articulately today. And the reason why it's a red herring is because today buyers agents are getting paid from the proceeds of the home sale, and that's being financed. That's what's being done today. So what that tells us is that in the future, for when buyers are negotiating with the commission directly from their agent, in order for that commission to be financed, the seller still needs to pay that amount at closing. That way we're operating the same structure, and there's no regulatory changes where we needed to ensure that buyers who are cash strapped are able to finance that commission. So then the question is, how can we ensure that sellers continue to pay, or really listing agents, well, let's just say sellers, continue to pay out the commissions that now are going to be negotiated between the buyer and their agent, rather than set upfront unilaterally by the seller. And just earlier today, I posted a paper on SSRN that goes into this in detail. And here I'll just sort of present the SparkNotes version of that, but that paper will go into all the details and all the nuances of this. The industry is assuming that sellers should continue to pay out the negotiated buyer's agent commission from the proceeds of the home sale. Or in other words, that the asking price of a home should continue to have this commission baked into it. Now, the issues are a couple major issues with this that, again, the paper will go into, and it's a bit nuanced. But the key takeaway is, number one, that'll complicate things significantly for buyers and sellers. Because now the asking price is 2 completely fundamentally different costs: the cost of the asset, the cost of the home, and the cost associated with the buyer purchasing that property. So it's, number one, it's complicated. And the second issue, and again, there's a lot of logic behind this, but there's a chance that if that process sort of continues, which it is today, where the buyer's agent is paid out from the net proceeds of the home sale, that the fraction of appraisals that come in below the contract price will dramatically increase. That's the other issue. Again, the paper will go into detail about that. So if there are issues with that approach, what is a simpler approach? And that's actually an approach that you heard earlier today on the call that Barry played, where the Rex representative explained that, hey, Mrs. Buyer's agent, if you want to negotiate a commission with your buyer, all you need to do is tack that negotiated commission on top of the offer price, and that total amount would then be in the offer. And so essentially the way that would work is, imagine you have a buyer who negotiates a 2% commission with their agent. and they find a home and the asking price of that home is $500,000, what's going to happen is the buyer or the buyer's agent is going to go, Mr. Seller, I'm offering you $500,000. I think that's a fair price. But my buyer negotiated a 2% commission with me. That 2% is $10,000 on the $500,000. I'm going to tack that $10,000 amount on top of the asking price. So I'm going to pay you a total amount of $510,000. And then at closing, you're going to pay out that $10,000 that I promised my buyer's agent to the buyer's agent. That way it's the same structure. The seller's paying it out. But what are the benefits of this approach? Number one, it's way simpler for buyers and sellers. From the buyer standpoint, they work with their agent. They negotiate that fee, 1%, 2%, 3%. That means that any home that the buyer sees is 1%, 2%, 3% more expensive than the asking price. So it's clear what that price is. And from the seller standpoint, all they need to think about is how much the buyer is offering for their home. The buyer's offering me the $500,000. They don't care what commission the buyer negotiates with their agent. That's just going to be tacked on and is not going to impact the seller's net proceeds from the home sale. So it keeps it much simpler. It also gets around the issue of what if sellers just refuse to pay a commission? What if they say, you know what, that's the buyer's responsibility. Why am I paying it? I'm not offering it. Really, that's not a good answer because the asking price is inflated to account for the commission, but that's complicated to understand, hence the complications of the current approach where that commission is baked into the asking price. And now they don't need to worry about it. Here's how much the buyer is willing to offer. That commission is added on top. It's completely independent. Also, as Professor Barry noted, the DOJ has made it clear in its statement of interest in the NOSLA case that the DOJ wants a world in which sellers cannot offer any compensation to buyer's agents. And this proposal is completely aligns with the DOJ's objectives, where the seller's not setting any commission. They're offering zero, and the buyer's just adding that on top of the offer price. And the fourth thing to note is that this is not entirely theoretical. This is actually the exact process, as we saw, that Rex Real Estate used to facilitate thousands of transactions. No issues with FHA home buyers, VA buyers, or no issues with any of that. So we know that it can be applied on a more national basis. Just very quickly, the one concern that you might have is, okay, well, that's all fine and good, but now you're tacking on top that negotiated commission on top of the offer price. So are you potentially going to run into appraisal issues where the home's not going to appraise for that amount? The paper goes into that in detail, and the long story short is that as long as a buyer negotiates a commission with their agent that is not drastically higher than what other buyers in the area typically negotiate with their agent, it's very unlikely you're going to run into any appraisal issues. And again, the paper goes into that in more detail. So that's the first question.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Go ahead.
One down that second.
Very quick.
And the second one is what?
Very quick. Imagine an area where the going rate buyer's agent commission is 3%. If buyers negotiate commissions with their agents of 3%, prices won't change. If in the other extreme, all buyers go unrepresented, prices will essentially drop by 3%. Of course, the true answer is going to be somewhere in the middle, and of course, the free market will dictate where exactly that is.
Thank you. Now we should have a question from the audience. Is anybody here ready to ask a question? If there's somebody coming, and in the next question we'll take from online questions.
So a lot of this talk has been about decoupling or changing the industry and whatnot. In my experience, it seems like, I think it was Mr. Ryan said that, even Zillow wasn't able to fend off the market conditions that are going on. And NAR is just, this is massive economic force that fighting against is going to be virtually impossible. And so you've got a bunch of realtors, like for example, in our market, 6% is the standard. We could try and decouple that. I think it's very unlikely though, because every single seller realtor is just going to say, no, I'm not going to accept anything less. So then what's the alternative? Working within the system. Well, so the biggest issue I've seen with regard to any changes that we've talked about in the system is that basically that every seller, every buyer, it's one of the biggest assets they're ever going to acquire is their home. So there's risk aversion. So how do you avoid that system? Well, in my experience, the only way you can do that is to work within the system and try and change things. And actually, I would really like to hear Mr. Ryan's opinion on this. It seems like the most effective way of changing this within the system is to basically pass on some of the savings to the buyer. And so how does that work? You agree that your fee as a buyer's agent is going to be $10,000, or it's just a set amount. Anything in above that would be passed on to the buyer, so it gives the buyer an incentive to use somebody in the system. And slowly, over time, you're going to develop this larger market share of these people who aren't tied to commissions. They're just tied to a fee. And it kind of overcomes this NAR's hold on the economic system as a whole. Well, this new system that's been developed now with this settlement, in my opinion, almost goes contrary to that, because now you've got these buyer agents that are saying, I have to pay this much. Well, I'll be honest, I haven't read the settlement, so I don't know if this is even a possibility, but it seems like under this new settlement, you can't pass on these savings any longer because you're saying, as the buyer's agent, I'm only going to be willing to accept this much. So then now the seller gets to keep everything else, and you can't pass those savings now onto the buyer. And so there's no longer this incentive to use somebody who's within the system, but trying to create a new system that's trying to break the hold that the NAR has on the whole realtor system as a whole. And so I'd just like to open it up to see what your opinion is on that and whether or not this is going to be kind of create an adverse effect on the whole system.
Excuse me. Well, your question is really, really complicated. I think everyone will agree, and it shouldn't be complicated because it should be a free market. Just have the buyers pay for buyers' agents, the sellers pay for sellers' agents, and then the market will set the price and stop this ability of people paying, some seller paying a buyer, buyers paying sellers' agents, vice versa, because it gets as complicated. Everything you said makes sense. But imagine if you sell a home once every 10 years and you're not an economist or a professor or a lawyer. It's hard to say, well, should I get a rebate? I don't understand. There's a 3% fee, but who's it go to? Where's the savings coming from? What are these other rules? It's like, oh my God, why can't it just be like buying anything else where if I need an advisor, I'll see what I think they're worth to me. We'll negotiate a price. When we come to a price, you'll pay me that price. It seems to me this is really complicated for no good reason other than a trade group saying all these crazy rules of competition. Anyway, anyone else want to add to that?
Anybody else? All right, we've got a question. We've got a question from the internet, from the online forum. Will the buyer still be able to finance their agent's fees if they are not paying it themselves and if it is not coming from the seller?
Yeah, so I guess hopefully that answer sort of addressed it there. And again, it keeps it simple. Again, it means it's very simple to Jack's point for the buyer. I'm working up front. I'm working with an agent. I'm paying them 1%. They're going to get 1% of the sale price or $5,000 or an hourly rate. And all it is I see a home. That home is on the market for $500,000. That's the price for the actual home, for the asset, not with the commission baked in, not all this complicated stuff. Or by the way, how do the buyer and seller even agree on sort of what commission is baked in? The seller is going to want to say 1% is baked in. The buyer is going to want to say 3% is baked in. And now not only do you have a back and forth about what the home is worth, but now you have a back and forth about what amount is baked in and how you're going to try to figure that amount out. So this really simplifies things. See a home, that's what's going to the actual seller for the home, negotiate a 1% commission by agent. I'm going to tack that on top. Just like I tack on a tip on a restaurant bill, and the sum total, that's the total. And obviously the buyer there can understand the incentive to try to negotiate a lower fee. If I negotiate a 1% fee instead of a 2% fee, how much does that save me? 1%. It's as simple as that. We don't need to complicate matters any further.
One thing I would add to is, as great an idea as that sounds, that's just not the reality today, which is that you can't finance buyer commissions. So until there's some changes in the various rules, around mortgages and how they're financed, it's a great idea. It's just not reality today. So the short answer to the question from online is no, you cannot finance your buyer commission today.
I just want to say something. We did it hundreds and thousands of times at Rex. So you can. There's nothing against it. And furthermore, just take this example. If I used to be a banker, they are very rational people. Would they prefer to loan $500,000 against a home that's worth $500 with a $5,000 fee on top of it that goes out of the system? Or would they prefer a $500,000 home with a $15,000 fee that goes outside the system? Of course, they want to finance the home that has more collateral that backs their loan. They race to the idea, great, it's not 3% fee, it's 1% fee. Then if things go bad, I have a $500,000 piece of collateral against a $505,000 loan versus $500,000 collateral goes $515,000 loan. Rob, we had no problem getting banks to sign up for that. It's really simple. They're very rational, very mercenary. They're like, thank you very much. They want more collateral, not less.
All right.
Yes.
All right. Anybody else on this one?
Just quickly on that point. So yes, to be clear, that can be financed because all that matters from the lender's standpoint is how much money is the buyer purchasing the property. They don't care what fraction is being spent on the home versus they look at the total amount. And so as long as the appraised value comes in at or above that total amount, there's no issues, right? This is the same structure. Right now you have a total amount and the seller is setting up front how much that is going to go to the buyer's agent. This we're operating under the same structure. You're going to have the total amount, but that total amount is going to be the price of the home. Now the commission that the buyer negotiated with their own agent, which gets around the anti-competitive concerns. So it's actually operating under the exact same structure. all the lender's going to care is, does the appraisal come in at or above the total amount, which is going to be the purchase price of the home to the seller and that negotiated amount. As long as the appraisal comes in above that, and again, the paper will go into why the vast majority of the time that should occur, there's no issue. You do not need any regulatory changes. And again, Rex proves the point. We have thousands of transactions. FHA, VA buyers, those are the loans that the industry is saying they're going to be harmed the most. We went through with no problem. We have the data to back it up.
Okay. I got now a question for Anna Bonney. How does this change benefit the sellers of property? Will sellers still pay commission? Yes. And I'm looking to sell my home. How should I factor the settlement in deciding whether to hire a seller's agent, who to hire, and how to set the terms of sale for my home, including any buyer's agent or agent's commissions?
Yeah, well, I mean, you pay the plumber that comes to your house, you pay the guy that fixes your car, you pay the lady at the hairdresser. Realtors are another service provider. Of course, you pay a commission to the seller agent. And you're getting ready to sell your home, you want to look at all the options. I mean, do you want to go? I think part of what's going to happen is that there's going to be a fracturing. So there's going to be like a white glove service, full service, all the pictures, drone shots of your house, all the stuff, and you're going to pay for that. And that'll be 6% or, plus. You're going to get all those packages. And then there's going to be an offering that'll be, I just want it put on the MLS. I want it put in a few places. I don't need a lot. I'll pay you a certain amount. And then there'll be some things in between. And I'm really interested to find out, this sort of new ideas like we haven't even thought about because there just hasn't been a possibility for innovation. And so I think, the cost analysis for a seller is how much you want to walk away with. And you can factor that into your price, or you can factor that into how you are going to sell the home.
Okay, now we're going to turn back to audience questions. So go ahead.
I think it's great timing that you talked about that. And I'm curious about the buyer side products that y'all think are possibly going to arise. I'm proud that I've fired 6 realtors in my life, specifically for a lot of the language that was on the forums that have been shown through these PowerPoints. And then when I moved here, I'm like, gosh, there's a Tisch report here. I don't really need a buyer's agent as much as I did in other markets. And like I teach property law. So I felt okay going to the seller's agent and saying, hey, you can have both sides. And to speed up the sale, she's like, I just want this house gone. She waived it. She made the money she wanted. But I had like a little head start, right? I had my education. I had the blessing of my parents' arrogance in me to be like, no, I will not do that. But what kind of products have you all seen, if at all, for buyers that would kind of negate that need for a buyer's agent since there's so much legal responsibility for disclosures anyhow?
So in theory, there's an infinite number of products, exactly to your point. In practice, there's none. And there's likely to be none. And the industry will get along just fine not having like law professors representing them. I think we'll be fine. Because the fact of the matter is, and I talk about this all the time, like, why do people trade in their vehicles, right, to dealers? When you're losing money, you'd make more money if you went and just sold it on yourself on whatever, one of these various, it's because it's easier. I do the same thing. Yeah, I could make more money. I know. Okay, cool. But you know what? I don't want to spend my Saturdays, with some guy coming by to do a drive test. Like, I think we really have to just understand that the way the system works, absent massive disruption, is not going to change. The buyer products, there's no shortage of companies that have tried all sorts of things, like Redfin with the rebate and, like all of it. With Rex, it's like some amazing companies with great leadership. They've tried it, hasn't worked. This settlement's not going to change it. Maybe some future settlement, maybe some future action, maybe by state AGs, regulators, future things could change it. And it's like, I don't love saying this to you. Like, the reality is nothing's going to change. And the people will try new buyer products. They will all fail. The startups who are going to try those will all fail. until something fundamental changes. And nothing fundamental has changed in the industry this year.
It's tough to be next to such an optimist.
Yeah, I wish I could be optimistic.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
So just think about this, right? like I told y'all, March 15th, the settlement comes down. March 16th, I get 3 phone calls from startup founders in real estate saying, I have a way of producing commissions for agents. Not one startup entrepreneur says, oh, now that this is here, you know what? I have this buy-side product I've been dreaming of forever. I'm going to do it. That did not happen. I'm just saying, like, this is the way the industry is going to react. It's bad news. I hate it. I wish there were fewer crappy agents, all those things. But it's just the reality of it. And I think, particularly because I know a number of the people who are watching online, y'all are in some positions of power and regulatory authority. Like, think about this. I'm telling you right now, given what's happened so far, absolutely nothing will change.
Okay, now I've got an online. Anybody want to add anything to that? No? Okay, anybody? All right, so I've got an online question, then we'll go back to the audience. For the panelists, do you agree with Professor Cox that people, particularly lawyers, don't need buyer agents? This is an online question.
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think a buyer agent can be very useful and can provide certain kinds of services. The question is sort of what services do you need? Does everyone need the same services? I would say no. If you move to a new area, you might not know it very well, and having a local guide is really valuable. If you live there a long time, you move around the block, you might not know that kind of information. You might already have that. You might want other things. You might want referrals for contractors, for an inspector. Like there's different packages of things that you might want. And so, let's take Rob's view for a second. Just assume that like the market offerings will not differentiate, which could or could happen, but like, I don't know. Let's take him. He would know better than me. So let's assume that's true. So if your only choice is pay 3% for a full service buyer agent or pay nothing and go on Angie's List and find a recommended for a contractor, for some people, option 2 is going to make more sense. Mm-hmm. And so, but not for everybody. So that would be my take. I wouldn't be categorical. I don't think Professor Cox is categorical either. I think he's just saying people should think about it more. But I'll let him speak for himself.
Thank you. I agree with Professor Cox. Exactly. I'm not saying, look, if you've never bought a home and you're scared to death of this and you've got somebody, it's really valuable to you to have somebody drive you around in their clean car, to show you every house, then yeah, maybe a 3% buyer is what you want. I don't think that most people are in the market are like that these days. I think most people sit down at their computer and call up all the houses and look at them and have a pretty good idea what they want to buy. And what they need is somebody to let them in the house and let their, father-in-law or hired, mechanical expert in the house to tell them what they're buying. And they need somebody to help them negotiate the transaction. And 3% isn't required to do that. One thing to remember, there are no educational requirements in most states for realtors, and some of these people do 3 or 4 deals a year, and some of them are highly knowledgeable, sophisticated, effective, but a lot of them, are somebody's brother-in-law and doesn't do a lot of deals. They have a high school education maybe, and there's hundreds of thousands of these people who are doing these deals, and they're going to be very rarely worth 3%. The top agents who are super effective and super sophisticated might be, and I think the key is to let the market sort between the buyers who need the most and others. Really, how often, to repeat myself from before, can you say, oh, get attorneys in here, they can do it for 1/3 of the price? That just gives you some sense of the degree of cartel pricing we're dealing with here. Right, yeah.
I just want to share one thought with that. So there's, in the fancy economist word, there's heterogeneity of housing stock, but a lot of the homes are very much the same. So if you look at the condos across the street, there's maybe 2-bedroom condos there, and there's 25 that traded in the last year. It's kind of like IBM stock. You know that it's going to trade. Maybe it goes up or down 2%. Maybe they have a Wolf refrigerator or something that's a little bit better. But everyone knows that house is going to trade, right? Pretty much. And what is the agent doing in that situation, at least on the sell side? This is the kitchen. Oh, I perceived it was the kitchen when I saw the refrigerator and the faucet. Here's the bathroom. I knew that was a bathroom. Thank you very much for your help. Now, having said that, with a 12,000 square foot home in Minnetonka on the lake, then maybe it is worth 3%. But I think what's going to happen, in the words that famous capitalist Chairman Mao, is 1,000 flowers will bloom, or 1,000,000 flowers will bloom. And you'll have people like happened in the stock brokerage business. It used to be everyone got charged 12 cents. And all this bad behavior, people are churning people's accounts because they're making money on commissions. And it moved to, some people still did that, and some people appreciated that. Some people moved to, okay, if you give me $1 million of assets, I'm going to charge you 1% a year, and I get no compensation based upon how many trades you do. I'll just think about you. One thing I'd like to say that I think is really important is the current industry, the customer is the agent, right? They want to recruit agents to their place and make sure they don't leave. So the franchisors are trying to be very nice to the agent. What needs to happen is the customer has to transform themselves, or be transformed in the eyes of the realtor, to the buyer or seller of the home. That's the fundamental problem. At Rex, all our people were salaried, and they got compensated at year-end based on customer satisfaction. When you base people on commission, you have a lot of the problems that happened. But having said that, that's an offshoot of, I think, 1,000 or 1,000,000 flowers will bloom once you take off all these rules that fix the behavior of how you have to operate a real estate firm.
Okay, now we'll turn to a question from the audience.
My question is, does the settlement propose to restrict offers of compensation directly to the buyers, whether on the MLS or otherwise?
Anybody want this one?
That's your powerhouse.
No. So the settlement only restricts offering cooperating compensation to the buyer's agent on the MLS. And it is also quite clear. I mean, this is not, this is intentional. Like, there's clear language on this. You can offer compensation to the agents off the MLS. That's fine. And they give a couple of examples that are specifically allowed. So this is not like a subtle, sneaky thing. It's right there in the language.
If I might add one, this is something I feel like a lot of folks don't quite understand, that there's a difference between offers of compensation and concessions from the seller. Offers of compensation are made between the brokers. The concession is made by the seller. So like what Will wants to see is more the concession where the seller would say, hey, you know what? You make an offer, you write 1% on top of it. I will give that to the buyer or to the buyer agent. That's a concession for the seller. What I'm talking about is the offer of compensation as the way it has existed for 100 years, where the listing broker will say, you bring me a buyer, I will pay you whatever it is, right? That practice remains. It just can't be done on the MLS. It's important to understand that difference, I think. So it doesn't matter, in a sense, what the seller might or might not want to do, might or might not want to entertain in terms of offers. The point is that the listing brokers will all offer compensation because they don't want to be blacklisted and they don't want bricks thrown through their windows and such. And we're going to have a million different ways for buyer agents to find out what their offer of compensation is, which means nothing changes.
Okay, I got a question for Jack Ryan. I would be interested in hearing thoughts about how this may resolve the issue of dual agency disclosures, and DOJ's work will not be done until it reverses the nationwide effort 3 decades ago to abrogate the common law of agency after Edina Realty lost in Minnesota for practicing undisclosed dual agency. How can the next generation of lawyers end this practice?
Actually, this is a question for Rob Hahn, because I'm not trying to duck it, but he spent a lot of time thinking about fiduciary duty. And this goes to the point that in the legal profession, you're not allowed to get compensation from the attorney on the other side, right? For obvious reasons, or you get disbarred. Same with under FINRA, with the investment banking business. When you're selling a company, you can't pay the agent for the other side. And I think it's pretty obvious why you cannot. Why these state authorities haven't going after this very basic law, as Professor Cox raised, on enforcing fiduciary duty, I have no idea. I told you the example about regulatory capture. We complained. Next thing you know, they're after us for the fonts of our advertising. But anyway, this is right up, Rob. This is your question, really, not mine.
I think this is Professor Cox's, because you're the one who pointed this out.
All the way down to me. Yeah. I don't know. I think your answer is fine. I don't have anything to add. Let me throw out yet another example of a kind of practice that's easy. That's just an easy enforcement get here. There on the MLS. Now, it won't be after the settlement, but there's bonuses offered, but they're not offered to the buyer. They're offered to the buyer's agent. I believe I heard once that when a builder offered cars, like a new Lexus, right, to the buyer's agent. I mean, can you make up an example of corruption more than that? All you have to do is find all those properties, call the buyers, the ultimate buyers of the property, and say, did you know your agent got $5,000 extra dollars? Interview them. And at the end ask, do you know your agent got a $5,000 bonus in addition to their fee or a Lexus or whatever? And if the answer is no, then you go after it. So it just seems to me that these are not complicated matters, but here's the difficulty of identifying those cases. Look at the MLS. To look in the search the MLS for bonus or what. I mean, literally, you can find these cases in 30 seconds with access to the MLS. And I know that one thing says, well, we don't have access to the MLS. It's like, of course you have. You're a regulator. You can subpoena access to the MLS. You can work with somebody else. I mean, these are not like, high level enforcement problems. This is basic motivational. I want to create a market that's fair and open. And I love the way Jack put it. You can tell he ran for Senate, although he'll never run for Senate again as a Republican after quoting Chairman Mao. And it's 1,000. That's right. Yeah, right. But I love the way you put it, on that. So these are not complicated matters, but it does require. It requires a motivation to say, we're on it. We are not going to let you get away with this stuff. If there's verbal bricks through windows, even if not literal, we're going to prosecute that. You have standards, you have duties, you have obligations, and we know what they are, and you're going to have to meet them now. This is a moment. The world's changed, as Anna said, hopefully. That's the idea. That's the positive option. And so that's it. So I said I wouldn't say anything, and then I talked for 2 minutes. So there you go.
All right, we've got a question from the internet now, and it says, in states where realtor forms are required and agents cannot write their own, what do you suggest?
Okay, that's fine.
Well, a real estate contract is one of the most common contracts in the country. There's 6 million are done per year. They're pretty easy. Now, if there's one that has some weird easement or something like that, or, something going on, of course you should, and that's probably a better solution, Professor Cox, that, really a lawyer should be helping you with that agreement, not taking a form off the web, or not the web, no offense, the Minnesota Association of Realtors form, and just filling in the price and things like that. But it's not difficult to recreate a contract for the purchase and sale of residential real estate, especially if it's a condo or a very simple house. And that's my thought. What do you all think?
I mean, if we're talking about regulators designing forms or states designing forms, prospectively thinking how they're going to work, I would kind of call back some of the points from the presentations today about how you can shift the forms to encourage conversations and competition in various ways. So if it's clear that, the agent is only going to get paid from the buyer, if you make the form, if there's sort of your default or otherwise structure it so that what the seller offers doesn't go to the buyer in the day, it goes to if the seller offers compensation, it basically makes its way to the buyer, not the buyer's agent, then you kind of end the steering problem. That's a way to deal with that. If you have the extra, if you have the advantages of a lower commission to the buyer agent accruing to the buyer themselves, that's an incentive for the buyer to push for lower commissions. That's the person who's able to do it. So you kind of channel things in that direction. I think you would get, I'm not sure how big the effect will be. You could disagree on that, but you'll get things pushing in the right direction. Commissions, I think, will come down at least somewhat. And, when you're talking about $100 billion a year, $120 billion a year in commissions, a small amount of movement is a lot of dollars. And I think once commissions start coming down, a lot of this is norms based and you steer based on what the going rate is. If you can start to erode the commissions over time, you can have a big effect over a long period. We've all experienced inflation recently, very, very visibly, and a small amount over time can really add up, as we've noticed, or sometimes bigger in short pieces. So I think that kind of dynamic could be really valuable. I think that these kind of forms could push in that direction. Though I'm excited to hear Rob tell me how that will not be as effective as I'm hoping.
I think the only comment, like I mentioned if you look at the Colorado state forms, those are drafted by the state. So the first place I would begin is who drafts the forms. If it's drafted by the realtor associations, you know what? They're going to draft them for the benefit of the realtors, as they should, because that's who their members are. Most states that I know of, the real estate commission is pretty much captured by the industry. Texas, for example, 6 of the 9 commissioners are brokerage members. So I suspect that their forms are going to be pretty friendly to the industry. That's not up to y'all, I think. That's up to your state legislature to do something about. Given that NAR and the state associations are one of the most powerful lobbies in the country, good luck to you. But if you want to look anywhere, I would look there. The next big fight after all this is said and done will be the forms. You don't control it today unless you're Colorado and to some extent Texas. And I don't know what other states might, draft their own forms. After that, you can start dealing with things like lockboxes and showings. In other words, I think what y'all need to understand about the industry is kind of what everyone's been saying. It's a collaborative industry. The monopoly powers none of it is de jure, none of it is written into law. It's all network effect. It's all social norms. It's all these sorts of behavior, whether that's the commission, the forms, the lockboxes, the showings, everything. So if you're going to bust it, you have to do something more than this. You've got to do something, potentially like Professor Cox mentioned. Maybe you have to send some people, to jail in orange jumpsuits. It's not going to be this. And it's not going to be thinking that the free market will somehow magically solve things. I just don't see it. Because where we've gotten to is the free market functioning within a very specific collaborative context. So, like I said, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I want to see reform. I think one of the biggest issues is we have too many crappy agents. Because it's kind of an answer to a previous question. I've worked with buyer agents every single time I bought a home, and they have been absolutely worth every penny I've ever paid them. Now, it's because I'm in the industry, so I kind of know not to hire the morons. And the ones who are great, and they're worth every penny. They know which side of the street floods when it rains. It's things like that. But we do have that problem. None of these things are going to solve that problem. I suspect those problems will be solved from within the industry. And that's kind of my hope. And perhaps what needs to happen is more of a inside-outside game, between people within the industry who want to see reform for a whole lot of reasons, and people outside the industry who want to see reform just to make things better for everybody. That's kind of my hope. Like I said, I limit it to this one ain't it. This one ain't it.
I have one thought for all the antitrust law professors here. All these MLSs say, hey, you're not using the realtor contract, and so therefore your house may not get sold. So it scares people into thinking that, oh, I didn't use the California Association of Realtors contract, and therefore my house that I just sold for $500,000, $800,000 may not actually happen. Well, that's the seal of approval cases that exist in antitrust law, right? If you don't join the group, they're not going to get the seal of approval, and therefore people are scared. And oftentimes you go to the website for the MLS, and just to further confound people, they have a picture of the state capitol in the background, as if this is the governmental body, and if you don't use the California Association of Realtors form, who knows what's going to happen? So this is a seal of approval. Remember these seal of approval cases, antitrust professors? Do you remember these? Okay, so that's one of the issues I would say. And I would say that I'm very optimistic as long as the people who can take care of all these rules, get rid of all of them. And it's a free market, and we'll see the results happen. By the way, this lockbox thing, this is just hilarious in terms of hilarious in terms of how it's bad it is that the whole reason for the joint venture, if you want to call it that from the rule of reason antitrust point of view, is that if we all come together and share our listings, we'll get more demand for these homes. And yet, if Rex brought a buyer to see a home, we're not a member of the MLS, they will not give us access to the home. We have a buyer for your home. I thought you wanted buyers for your home. Is that what you want? Yes. We're agents. We want to come and see the home. Are you a member of the MLS? No. Can't see the home. Well, that undermines the whole idea of this is, a pro-competitive thing. Last thing I'll say about this, and can I say one more thing or no?
Certainly.
Okay. The last thing I want to say about this is there's all these rules. One rule I didn't mention is if anyone touches an MLS, they must join that MLS. Remember I said there was like this rule, one person joins, everyone else has to join. So if you touch it, you got to join. If we have 200 data scientists in Austin, Texas, we didn't have that many, we had a lot. There's 600 MLSs in the country, about. The MLS dues are $1,000 per MLS. And if we have 400 people who have to touch all those MLSs to do their data science work, that's about $120 million per year in MLS dues. Now, no one charged us for it, but we lived in fear that someone's going to say from the National Association of Realtors, oh, you have 200 Will Frieds. They're touching 600 MLSs because they're doing data science on what's the value of a home based upon different criteria. He has to pay for the dues at 600 MLSs. No one can pay $120 million to get access to the data to be part of the MLS. That's why these 600 MLSs are protectionism. They are creating a balkanized economy, which is directly contrary to what? The Commerce Clause. So anyway, you all should go after the Commerce Clause too. All right.
All right. We got a question from the, thank you. Do we have a question from the audience?
Yeah, as I understand the decoupling argument, it's trying to put more emphasis on the buyer's agent so that the buyers are negotiating with their agent. But isn't that going to reduce the number of buyer's agents because they're all just going to try to become seller's agents then? And I guess I'm interested in how you see all that filtering out.
Anybody to speak to that? There's a
professor. Yeah, I'll speak to that. So I think if, contra Rob, if we did have a successful settlement, I think we would see a lot of agents leave the industry. And, right now, even the industry isn't even that great for agents. I think Rob could speak to that better than I can. But, a lot of agents spend a lot of time trying to chase down clients. They're not actually doing their jobs. They're not helping their buyer find a better house or informing their buyer about how to make sure the deal goes through or helping their seller get the best possible price. Instead, they're chasing down clients. And what we would really like to see is maybe prices fall. A lot of these people leave the industry who are maybe not the most effective agents and go off and do things that really they are great at. And meanwhile, have a small coterie of agents left over who, maybe they get paid less, significantly less, but they do, if they get paid 0.5%, but they do 6 times as many deals, they're making just as much money as they were before. They're just spending their time doing their jobs and not looking for clients.
I mean, I guess in a world where this settlement wasn't this settlement, that would be the case. But fact of the matter is the settlement is the settlement. And there's no reason for a buyer agent to leave. This whole notion that the buyer agent will now start negotiating with the buyer, I'm saying to me, this is not going to happen. What the buyer agent is going to do is put a buyer form in front of them that says 3%, you're not responsible. The next side comes in here and says it's 1%, but you're responsible. And as a buyer, I would take the former every single time, especially if I'm a first-time home buyer, especially if I don't have millions and millions in equity built up. And if I did, you know what? I have all sorts of options, right? I'll pay you flat. I'll pay you by the hour. I'll hire a lawyer. We're talking about the average consumer who is the moment they're trying to buy a house is when they're least cash rich. And at that point, you're going to ask them to put themselves on the hook. It's not going to happen. The buyer agents will very quickly learn, hey, what we need to do is put 3%. You're not on the hook. Use the Colorado State form, that language. Nobody needs to leave the industry. Yes, everything you just mentioned, all the negatives still stay in place. The buyer agents will be out there trying to get lottery tickets. Nothing changes. That's kind of my point behind this. I think the motivation behind this event really is, especially with all of the sort of, regulators, some of the thinkers, think of the next thing, because this ain't it. Whatever comes next might be how you achieve some of the goals that we all have here. I'm just saying this isn't it. Nothing will change.
Okay, I've got a question for Jordan Berry. Do you think that the class action NAR settlement resolves the issues that the DOJ had with NAR's conduct?
No. So I think the DOJ is pushing for, at least based on the Noseleg filing, they're pushing for decoupling explicitly. They might, I don't know what the DOJ is thinking. I can't speak for them. It strikes me as not entirely implausible. They might go for something that was effectively the same result without the same mechanism. I could imagine that. But I don't think that they're going to find that this settlement gets there. No. I don't know what they're going to do with that, but I think they're going to they're thinking about these things, and you've got a lot of agreement in this room about a lot of the, not total agreement to be clear, but I think the DOJ is going to, my bet, not an informed bet, mind you, I don't know what they're thinking, but my bet is that they're not going to love it, and I don't think that will end it for them. I don't know what they're going to do about that. They might file a statement of interest. They might continue their own investigation and go from there. I don't know. But my bet is that they're not done with this. And personally, I'm glad.
Okay, anybody else? All right, I have a question from the internet. It's for the average person, buying or selling a home is not a frequent event. Mention was made earlier of having buyers and sellers push for more competitive commissions. What would this look like, both as to timely education and getting them to actually take this on in a given transaction?
Yeah, that's a great one. I think it's useful to consider this process. Like, just imagine this is just any other market. Like, if you have to get some plumbing work done, you just get a couple of quotes. Like, nobody says, oh, I didn't realize I should get quotes. I thought there was a plumbing rate that was set by the state. Or like, oh, I called one guy and everybody charges the same amount for this all the time. Like, it's not that simple. And you might not love what you have to pay. Plumbers can be expensive, which I mind they earn it. It's a hard job. But that's a process. Plumbers do compete on price, among other things. Like, you don't necessarily hire the cheapest guy. It doesn't give you a good feeling. You hire someone who knows what they're doing better. That's fine too. And agents can be the same way, but you want to get that process going. And that could be negotiating directly with agents, or probably maybe more likely just that they'll advertise or they'll be willing to offer you a low rate, and you kind of go different places and shop around. And I think that if you sort of treat this like any other market, that's what you would see. It's sort of like, I think kind of the better question in some ways is, why isn't this like other markets? Why don't people do this already? If you buy a car, you don't go to one dealership and be like, well, I got an agent, I'm going to buy. Like, you go to different places and you ask around. That's my take, but I bet other people have much smarter things to say.
Is John, did you want to say something? Oh, Laura, I'm sorry. Gloria, did you want to?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was going to say, and to me, both kind of in my own kind of reporting and talking to home buyers, and also having talked to the plaintiff's attorneys and talking about what Rob and some others have said about this not changing anything, I think that is what I hear a lot, which is, if you're going to ask an individual buyer to try to negotiate with their own agent and try to get them to come down in price, that's like tremendously awkward. That goes against human nature for most people. But that what you need is that you need sort of models to emerge. Like, the idea of the settlement, right, is to hopefully create some space for new models to emerge, where it's not a question of me going to my agent who, has bought and sold my last couple of houses and having to negotiate with them, but that I can actually sort of have some alternatives in the marketplace, companies that I can go to where I'm not having to ask them to lower their price. They're offering that lower price. And that's kind of my theory of how things potentially could change.
Okay, we got a question from the audience.
Rob, the things Rob has said are very reminiscent of the tobacco industry. And ultimately, after 40 or 50 years, the tobacco industry is at least in retreat. And that was due in part to lawyers. It was due in part to scientists and professionals like you guys are. But I think it was mostly due to a huge public outcry, to a political social movement. And what you've outlined is an industry that is extremely important financially, that's totally corrupt, and that is operating in dozens of ways that are patently illegal. So do you have suggestions about the basis for a similar sort of consumer movement that the lawyers and professionals can play off of?
So I'm going to pass to you, but yes, but not a consumer movement, because consumers simply don't interact with housing often enough. Whereas tobacco, you're smoking 3 packs a day. Ask me how I know. I think, in terms of reforms, like I said, to me, it's very simple. For anyone listening, if you want to solve this problem, you have to eliminate steering. It's that simple. Whatever reforms, whatever schemes you come up with, if you do not eliminate steering, nothing will change. we will find a way around it. And like not in a year or two, like in a couple of weeks, we'll find a way around it. So I don't think consumers are going to do that. I don't see a consumer movement in that sense. I think there could be changes and reforms within the industry, where people say, we don't need to engage in this sort of steering behavior. I think there's certainly regulatory or legislative actions that could change that. The Department of Justice statement of interest in no select was a really strong one that would have eliminated steering. But that's not the situation we're in. So that would be my comment there.
Okay, I'll do another conflict of interest disclosure. That's Jack Kahn, and he and I are co-counsel on a case. He's with the Housing Justice Center regarding rent limits. Okay, I haven't done that. I totally agree with Ron. And something more than that. I mean, this is not tobacco. This is not, this is like, gee, I could have saved $10,000 on this major purchase and I didn't. But it's one, you do it how often, right? As was mentioned by a prior questioner. So I don't see, the consumer interests are diffused, which is the classic consumer protection problem. And I also don't like the idea of I don't like this when we say, well, we just need more consumer education. It's kind of a blame the victim thing, in my opinion, sometimes. Not always, sometimes. I think it suggests that consumers are to blame for having gotten ripped off here. And that's just, as was mentioned before, it's just a really complicated transaction and it doesn't make, it's going to be very difficult for consumers to do this. That's why it really has to be regulators. Of course, the silver bullet is the federal regulator. We would love that, but, you can't always hold out for that. Plus, there's an election in November and one of the people on the ballot is a real estate developer. So, and so you can never hold out for the silver federal antitrust bullet, even though that's likely the best solution. However, I really do think it's possible for like a couple of states with a couple of people who get motivated about this to convene something between the attorney general and the real estate regulator and maybe someone else and say, okay, we're going to divide this up and we're going to make it clear to the industry that if you steer, you're in trouble. Okay, you're fiduciaries, you have antitrust problems and, bring cases and make it clear that that's going away in that state. And if we can get a couple of states where we allow a free market to develop, you're going to see models. And then you're gonna say, well, it costs 2% to sell your home in state of Washington or Massachusetts and, 6% everywhere else. Here's what the state of Massachusetts is saving. And it's gonna be a gigantic $1 billion number every year, right? And then that's, I think, the better way, the more likeliest scenario to change the dynamic. And we've seen this over time with attorneys general because you can shutter the federal government. Like even when they make movement, administrations change and then all of a sudden cases go away, right? And so you can shutter the federal government. You can't shutter every state attorney general in the country. It's just not going to happen. And there's always going to be someone there to do it. Laura, did you have something on this maybe? No? Okay. All right. Now pass it.
I think it's really got to be the Department of Justice and the FTC, and maybe that's too optimistic, but in the end, all the private plaintiff can do is complain about what happened to them. We only have standing, Rex only has standing on the fact that on the verge of our IPO, Zillow joined the National Association of Realtors. There was an offer out there by NAR to join us, and then you enforce all these rules. Zillow accepts it, and all of a sudden our homes are put on the back of all the websites, and all of a sudden we go from 100% growth to no growth. And that's not fundable. If you're going to go at 2%, I'll invest in Procter & Gamble, not in Rex, right? At 100%, all the investment banks are chasing us saying, we take you public. You're the next Uber of this, huge industry. So I think it's got to be the DOJ because they represent the United States of America, not just my single issue, but the issues of all the rules that I described to you, that if they lose this one, they're pulling out the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. They have a lot. So we've got to get rid of all those rules. Who can do that? The only person who can do that, the only group who can do that is the Department of Justice. And by the way, I mentioned to you that the lobbying power of the realtors is pretty big. They spend more money than any other trade group in DC. That's very powerful. There's also 2 million of them. And I hope that the head of the antitrust division, Mr. Cantor, and everyone else who's there, there's a reason they're there, not at Cravath or some fancy firm, because they want to do right in the world. So that's why at the Department of Justice, I hope they fight any political pressure to say, hey, do we really want to tick off 2 million agents in an election year? Because that could happen. I'm not saying it would, but I hope they stand up for truth, justice, and the American way, which is a free market, and let the market decide what the price is, not some trade group with all these crazy rules.
Okay, we've got a question from the internet. In the real estate industry, have federal or state regulators looked into collusion between the agencies and home warranty companies? If so, what can be done to uncover and prevent that?
I'll take a crack at this. I'm sorry I'm taking cracks at so many of these things, but we were looking for attorneys general, Democrat, Republican, who felt safe in their spots, because they don't want to take on this issue, right? They want to get reelected. There's lots of agents in Iowa or Minnesota, and they have lots of money. I was just talking about the $80 million they spent at the federal level. The money they spend at the local level and the individual agents, it's even more. It's crazy. So you got to take, if you're an AG using a tough race, I don't know. Do I really want to take on the realtors this year? I don't know. It's tough. So we were always looking for AGs, and this goes to the warranty issue, who wanted, either were in it for wearing the red cape, and that's why they got into politics, as many people here did. Or second is they felt impregnable, and this is a good way to get more people on their side. But if you're in a close election, I don't know if the attorneys general have the fortitude, is that the right word? Courage to take this one on. I don't know. You were an assistant attorney general, so what do you think, sir?
Well, I was never elected. I would be a horrible politician. I would be a ridiculously bad politician. I have a lot of respect for. Yeah. Anyway. Here's the deal with attorneys general. It's like, first of all, there's a lot of expertise. There's a lot of good attorneys, assistant attorney generals out there. There's a lot of quality people, a lot of people who are focused on the right thing. You don't need the ones in a tight race if that's a problem. 3/4 of them are not in a tight re-election race on either side, right? All you need is a couple of attorney general. It's better than one. One's enough. Two's great. 3 is a huge crowd. If you get 3 attorneys general of medium-sized states or more, that's a tremendous clout. And so that's all you need. And I think that's achievable here. From the point of view of someone who had to pick cases, and the problem is you have to think of the attorney general. How many attorneys do you have? Like the amount of an estate department at a medium, large law. I mean, just a few, right? And, you've got 1,000 different possibilities, consumer finance, just goes on and on and on. So I think that the pitch here right now is that this is a different moment. It would have been really hard to run against this brick wall a year ago, but you just watched a jury in Missouri return a $1.8 billion verdict in 2 hours. In 2 hours, right? Okay, and so it's like that changes things, and the settlement changes things. You are now in a disrupted market, so I think you have a much better pitch of you're not having to break down the brick wall, you're just having to go in and do surgical strikes around a theme of that. And it's also, the other thing is, it's totally consistent, if you're talking about Democratic attorney generals, it's totally consistent with the themes that are being played right now. When the State of the Union, Biden was talking about junk fees, right? I mean, so this is junk fees writ large. This isn't a bag of potato chips. This is a truckload of sugar daddies. You know what I mean? This is the junk fees of all junk fees. And so it's consistent with that. It's consistent with making home prices affordable. It's consistent with a lot of themes that are happening. So yeah, go out and find a couple of attorney generals who have the capacity to jump in and get expertise here. And hopefully, if they're listening, I know many of them are, right? If they're listening, this will give you a sense of where you might look to talk to people for the expertise to understand the industry and where there's opportunities in the industry. So.
Okay, we have a question.
I would just like to add one quick note there, though. If you call realtor commissions junk fees, watch how fast your primary opponent will raise funds from the real estate industry.
That's why I'm not a politician. I am not.
Okay, we have a question from the audience.
Thank you. Well, I have my bag packed and I'm ready to run out the door because I expect a lot of pushback on this. My full disclosure, I've been in the real estate industry for 20 years, more on the commercial side. I am a licensed real estate agent in the state of Minnesota. I am not a realtor. And I did not ever expect, I thought the irony of hearing an attorney talk about how there's too many agents in the United States was an interesting comment, and that they're paid too much as well. I never thought I'd hear that. I just wanted to provide a few comments, and I don't know if I have a question, it's just some comments. One, I completely agree with you in terms of things like steering. Certainly when people are paid are given Lexuses without BMWs, without that being disclosed, that needs to stop. I'm glad you mentioned that a few times. I do think that some of the comments here, I think it's a little more the exception than the rule, and I think it was kind of used a bit as propaganda here. I think by and large, most agents do not follow that, but I still agree that steering and that those types of practices need to stop, full stop. In terms of in Minnesota, Rob Hahn, I generally agree with you, if you're not surprised. But we do in Minnesota have requirements for buyer representation, and typically those contracts state that the buyer is responsible for the commission if it's not paid by the seller or the seller's agent, if it's not submitted. And that works, and people do sign up for that, and I think that type of contracting disclosure is very effective, and that's actually why I think in Minnesota we won't see as much or any change as a result of this. My advice to all of you, because I get the sense that there's a lot of people that want to see change here. What I felt was lacking in the conversation today is the recognition of the value that the real estate agents provide. I think it's disingenuous. I think it's actually potentially harmful to suggest that buyers, particularly unsophisticated buyers, don't need an agent. They do much more than open doors for people and point out the kitchen. A good agent, there are some bad agents, good agents will understand the market, they'll understand prices, they'll understand how to negotiate, they'll understand the issues when they're in a difficult situation, when they're up against many fellow buyers and they have to position their offer well. They understand the value of bad things that don't, or they prevent the bad thing. There's the value in the bad things that don't happen. Understanding which side of the street floods. Understanding that you should scope the main drain before you purchase the property so that you can avoid a $10,000 fee. So there's a lot of value in that. The agents also are paid on, their fees are at risk, and I think we need to keep that in mind. They spend a lot of time helping buyers, and they often may not get paid because a deal doesn't get closed. A deal doesn't go through. So it's not a fair comparison to compare that to those who are paid hourly. And the reason, and I think the other piece of this is to understand and quantify what the value of an agent had, the value that an agent provides. We use a comparison between the United Kingdom, where they get 2% commissions, versus here. United Kingdom is an anomaly. They're actually on the lowest end of countries. There are some countries like France where they get paid 8%. US is on the higher end, but it still is not all countries are at that 2%. Regardless of where commissions are in other countries, I think it's important to understand what that value is, because if we're pushing for change, we need to understand, well, what is our target? What is a fair? If it's not 3% per buyer and seller, is it 1%? Is it 2%? Because I think the argument falls flat without that understanding or that target. Thank you.
Sure.
You want to go first?
Oh, no, you had the microphone. I'm sorry. You go first.
Oh, it's okay.
No, you go first.
I'll be brief, I guess. So I want to be clear. Like, I don't think that realtors are bad people. I'm not saying that like a real estate agent is a bad. Like, don't be nice to them. They're nice people. I have a close family member who's a realtor, and she's great. A big fan. Love her. I do think the system has some problems, and I think it would be good to make the system better because people operate within the system, and that's just how things work. But to be clear, like realtors provide services, absolutely. Service providers should be paid for their work. They're not doing it for charity, and they shouldn't be expected to. I agree with that. And some of them can provide a tremendous amount of value. So no argument at that level of generality. And I'm not here to beat anybody up. I just think that if you have a bad system, you're going to get bad outputs without having bad people. And people operate in those sorts of environments. So I think that's important to think about. All right, I'll turn it over to Jack.
I also agree that agents bring value. The question is, how much is that worth to somebody? And so how it works in every other industry is you make the case that you just did, that you add a lot of value, and I make the case that I don't think you're worth as much as you think you're worth, and then we agree on a price. And that's fine. I don't think the market clearing price is going to be 3%, but what do I know? I'm not the picker of prices, nor should you be. We want the free market to decide the price. And so whatever you think about your value, and I think about my value, that's great. But guess what? We're not the arbiters of that. The market is. And so that's what we're trying to get to, is a free market where buyers and the sellers come together, unconstrained by these NAR rules, and say, what are you worth to me and what can you bring? And your argument's a very good one when you say, hey, you should pay me 3%. And I'll have arguments as to why on this one-bedroom condo, I think you're worth $3,000. And who knows? Maybe I'll find someone to do it. Maybe I won't. But that's how the free market works.
We have John Hatfield.
I just wanted to basically say the same thing that Jack said. Like, we can't give you a number about what the right price for real estate agents is because, we don't know what it is. We just think that the 3% price that we see for buyer agents today is sort of there for, not there being set by competitive pricing. And, and as Jack said, look, there's going to be some realtors who are absolutely worth their 3% because they're going to help me find a new $1 million home in a new city that I don't know, and I'm absolutely going to be willing to pay that. But for the person who's buying a condo, of which there's 50 almost identical condos, they probably need much less bespoke service. They'll go for a lower price. And we really want to see this market competition drive consumers to get a better deal and for everyone to get more value out of the transaction.
So since I just wanted to add, I'm the one who said, look, I've always used a buyer agent and they've been worth every penny I've ever paid because they're good ones. My frustration with the system, with the settlement, with everything, and people who've read my work, and Notorious knows, it does not solve the number one problem of the industry, which is we have too many crappy agents. You go and ask any practicing realtor across the country and you ask them, what is your number one problem? It's not commission. It's the agent on the other side who's incompetent, unethical, immoral, a moron. That's the problem. And I do think steering and this compensation scheme does play a role in maintaining the ability of such morons to stay in the business. So that's my frustration. Is that something that I think we could all come together and try and solve? I kind of do. I really don't think you're going to find many realtors or MLS executives or brokerage leaders sitting across the table from a regulator saying, hey, we need to do something about the surfeit of morons in this industry. I bet we could find some real common ground there, and that might actually end up helping solve some of these problems as well. So I just want to point that out. I'm with you. Like, it's not the value of the good real estate agent. I don't think many people could question that. It's the bad ones. What do you do about them?
So just quickly on the point of steering, I think one of the common themes throughout all our talks is actually the core issue underlying things. Jack pointed out a lot of other issues. Those are more second order. And as Rob has pointed out, as long as steering stays, nothing changes at all. And that's obviously been a common response to the industry is, yes, buyers agents have an incentive to steer, but it doesn't happen. It's very rare. And that's where sort of the paper comes into play. And the reason why Professor Barry and Professor Hatfield and I tried writing it to show empirically that no, the data suggests that steering is quite widespread, right? There's new data that was only available 2 years ago. The commissions that are offered by buyers agents before that information was just limited to the MLS, or only agents had access. And the data shows in 32 random markets that we had data across the country. We didn't cherry pick it. If a seller offers a commission below the going rate, whatever that commission rate, whatever that going rate is, your home will get fewer page views on Redfin, public portals, less attention. Your home is going to have a lower probability of selling within a timely fashion. And if your home does sell, it's going to take longer to sell. And obviously, we're trying to make a causal claim there. There are a lot of confounding variables I'm sure a lot of you are immediately thinking of. Take a look at the paper. We control for those, and we see the exact same effect across 32 heterogeneous markets. If there's one thing about real estate, right, what everyone was saying, real estate's local. Location, location, location. 32 random markets, you see the same effects. You offer just below the going rate, there's an effect. You offer below 2%, which Professor Barry alluded to, is sort of a cliff that less than 1% of sellers drop below that level. Less than 1% of sellers offer a commission below 2%. If you do that, the numbers get significantly worse. So there's that empirical data, and you have the Rex calls. 3 of them were played today. There were 700 of those calls in a small brokerage that had whatever, small market share. Jack's gonna want to say, whatever, small market share. And there were hundreds of other calls where it's 90% certain that the agent was not going to show the property, but they didn't explicitly admit it on the call. And so because of that, it wasn't included. That's a small brokerage there. So this is rampant, and therefore really, needs to change.
Okay, this is a question for Laura. There's been a lot of this settlement doesn't change much, but from your reporting, have you seen attorneys countering the power of the NAR at the local level?
That's a good question. I mean, it's interesting. I haven't, I didn't give sort of my own presentation. I don't know if I actually believe, after having talked to a lot of people, that the settlement won't change much. I think we'll sort of see that play out in the coming months. I think there is an argument to be made that the buyer's agents' agreements, if people follow them to sort of the spirit of them and don't try to set themselves up to get sued again. And if, you know, if the industry sort of, I think there may be players in the industry who act in good faith, and we do see meaningful change, maybe not altruistically, but again, because we just saw a $1.8 billion judgment leveled against the industry when they didn't, and I think there may be some incentive in the industry to change their behavior. But to kind of get to your question, do I see sort of local attorneys? No, I don't think so, because these are very, very complicated cases. When I talk to sort of plaintiffs' attorneys who brought these cases, they invested, this is not an exaggeration, millions of dollars in these cases over the last 5 years. And so it only really makes sense if the stakes were national. It only really makes sense because the damages in this case were in the billions of dollars. And so I would kind of agree with the other panelists that if we want to see more change, if we want to see stronger change, I think the limitations of the private lawsuits, that kind of people have alluded to, is there was only so far they could go. They could kind of only address what the lawsuit addressed, and DOJ has really much broader powers to kind of shape the industry. And so it'll be kind of a question about whether they want to get involved. And I think the politics of that are tricky. You have this settlement, you've had these national headlines, including my own paper, saying this panel was a big freaking deal. You've had the president saying, you know, some positive things about it. And so whether they feel like they have the kind of political ammunition, especially heading into an election, to really kind of wade into this, I think will be the kind of question for us for the next few months. But I think that's the kind of firepower you need, the U.S. government, not kind of your local attorney in Minnesota kind of really wanting to change it.
Okay, I think I just have one more question, and this is from the online viewers. Is there an anti-NAR organization that folks can look to for model legislation?
The RAN, yeah, here you go.
Well, there's area. We'll see. The short answer is no, not really. There are some nascent efforts. We'll see if they have any traction.
Okay. Well, I think.
Can I say one more?
Sure.
I just want to note one thing that may have gone by people. At the beginning of those Rex tapes, it said, "You're being recorded." Think about that for all those people saying, "Oh, I'm not showing them." They knew they were being recorded. They had no concern about saying, "I'm not showing my buyer a property if I'm not getting paid by you to my standards." It's an interesting observation, I think. Okay.
It's a good observation.
By the way, I say,
Please.
there's a lot of sample bias in that, right? Because that's the people who didn't see that we weren't offering a commission, just said, forget it. I'm not going to even show this house, right? So these are the people who actually called up to see if what they saw was true. So a lot more of that was going on, right, than actually showed up.
Moron realtors who didn't read the screen.
Maybe. I don't think any realtors are morons. I put that in Rob Hahn, and his phone number is. I guess, so that is, One issue is just the kind of the sample bias attached to who's calling up to ask, about what the fees could be. So it's much more pervasive than just the people who called up.
Yeah, I'll jump on that and add to it because, also you only have to call once to learn the commission rule. So if you have 30 buyers, you call the first time and learn the rule, and then you know what the rule is. You don't have to call again. So if you're going to steer after one, you're going to steer the next 29 presumably also. And if you work with someone in the same brokerage, you might ask them first, hey, heard of this Rex guy? What's their deal? Oh yeah, here's their deal. Oh, I better not call them. I got it. So hundreds of calls, to be clear, is going to be a extreme undercount. Yeah.
This goes back to antitrust law also, is just the custom of industry. And actually, Professor Hatfield's done some amazing research on this. He referred to the NASDAQ. I had a front row seat. I have to say, I wasn't involved, but I saw it from the front row, that if you tried to sell shares for less than 12 cents, whether it's one share or a million shares, your boss got a call saying, Jack Ryan's acting unprofessionally. Do you know he just charged 10 cents to move these shares, not 12? And believe me, you wouldn't do it again, right? And these are all on tape. It's almost the exact same thing as happening here. But it's so part of the culture, no one thought that was a bad idea, right? And so this goes to the point of how do you root out a culture that is fundamentally flawed? And that's why I'm saying it's not only that these rules that regulate competition have to be eliminated, but I don't think white-collar workers should be any different than blue-collar workers if the bad behavior is so much in the DNA of the organization. Then you need to set up a district attorney who's going to supervise this, like the Teamsters, right? Those guys work really hard, by the way, the Teamsters. Some of you are saying the agents aren't working so hard, but I would say that we need someone to supervise it because it's so much in their blood to figure out how can I cartelize this industry.
Okay, well, I think we're done. Thank you. You want to? Do you want to? Oh, sure. Sure, go ahead.
I just want to reiterate, those phone calls were basically as he described, but there was more profanity in them. So they were pretty uninhibited phone calls. And I think it's just, there's an old joke that these two fish swimming along, and an older fish goes the other way and goes, hey, boys, how's the water? And a minute later, the fish go, what's water? Because you don't think about what you live in and what you swim through every day. So if you're an agent, you get you get norms that you pick up and you learn how to be an agent of people around you. And that's how you act. And this is true like in every industry, and some industries is stronger than others. And this is sort of the background on which you operate, and you don't always consider it. And the norms can develop that are not always good from a social perspective. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. You learn what you learn. And so in a totally different industry, I talked to a guy who I really respect, a very ethical, smart guy, and he talked about if someone refers you, you don't compete with them so much. That's just professional courtesy. And, that's business ethics. And as an analyst person, you're like, I wouldn't put it that way. But he didn't think he was doing anything wrong. He was just, this is how, it would be a really jerk move if I didn't do it that way. And so I think the key here is not that realtors work hard. They're out there trying to get clients. That's what they spend a lot of time doing these days, is working on that. Some of them provide tremendous value, and they're good people working, they're doing their best. But if you put a good person in a bad system, you can get really bad results. And so that's why I think we need to change the system to get better results instead of the people. So I think that's all our time for today.
Yes.
So
thank you very much.
Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you for.